good evening, good night, good afternoon. God bless you and thank you for coming out. I am Dr. Collins and this is the BigPotz Podcast. As we proceed to give you what you need, please like, subscribe, and share the BigPotz Podcast.
I like this. So, all right, we're ready.
Alrighty, y'all, we are back and better than ever. And as promised, today we have the awesome, the fabulous, the great Dr. Rhonda Jones.
As the crowd grows wild.
All right, y'all back there, settle down, settle down.
You need some applause sound effects.
Don't worry, we're going to edit it in. We're going to edit it in. How are you doing today, my friend?
I am doing well. It's so good to see you. Thank you for hosting me.
Oh, thank you for agreeing to be here.
Yes, I always love a good invitation.
Now, y'all have been following me for a minute, and y'all know that I recently moved to California from North Carolina. And I was working at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Well, in one of the many amazing people I met there was Dr. Rhonda Jones. And we've known each other since, weirdly, right before the pandemic. But in such a time, she has been not only my colleague, but my friend, my mentor, shoulder to complain and lean on in times of duress, dealing with white supremacy at work and at home. I brought her here today because Dr. Jones is not only a PhD in public history, she is also a active archivist who is just set to publish one of her first books on public lynching. I think that the conversation surrounding the development of that book and most importantly, the content of that book are contextually appropriate, not only for us to have a public conversation between two Black academics, which most of y'all never ever get to hear, especially behind the scenes conversation, but also because it lends itself to contemporary problems that we're having, if we'll say that. You know, at the end of the day is you kind of got to be gentle in the way that you talk publicly, especially about, fearless leader and them. I think that the conversation that Dr. Jones is having in her research is appropriate to help those of us who are trying to psychologically and socially manage the contemporary moment. Understanding how the now relates to the then will help us all better be able to manage what we do in the now for the next. With that, I present to you my good friend and colleague, Dr. Rhonda Jones.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Collins. Thank you for the invitation. And I don't know, where would you like me to start? Where would you like me to start talking about the book or talking about how I got to this point of the book?
I would like you to introduce yourself.
Okay.
My superlatives can only
Well, just to talk about my research interest, I started out being a scholar of civil rights and kind of resource mobilization. I wrote my dissertation on fundraising and philanthropy for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And so doing that work of, why was money important? We talk about, the massive arrests. We talk about needing money for bails. We talk about, as an organization, there are administrative costs. We never look at the expenditures in terms of how much does it actually cost to put together a program. And so you see that, Dr. Martin Luther King is kind of like a fundraising mechanism among himself. There are multiple income streams. He's selling his books. He's, getting speakers' fees. He's on television making appearances. He's going to, churches, and they're having mass rallies and they're passing the plate. So it's old school, it's, secular, it's spiritual. There's all of those components to it. And so from that research, of course, you start talking about the violence that's associated with the movement. And so from there, I began to look at the microcosm of, the nuances of segregation, of Jim Crow, of what the fight was really all about. It wasn't just about signage. It was so much more than that. It was, economic inequity. It was economic, educational disparities. It was democratic, and, like everything about it was an unparalleled system. And looking at segregation in terms of that it's a threat to white supremacy. And the threat is physical as well as emotional, it's economic, it's so many components to it. And doing that research, then of course, I started teaching public history and teaching civil rights. And from there, actually getting a second degree, going back to graduate school and earning a master's in library science on top of public history, which to me, I was doing archives and records management. It was just another layer. And we live in a credentialed society. Yeah. And so in order for me to work in special collections and to do other things, and I'm teaching, I thought, well, I don't want my students to know more than me. So of course I go and I'm getting all the experience that I need. And my first job when I wasn't teaching in the classroom full time was I created a lynching archive for the Civil Rights Restorative Justice Project, which is based out of Northeastern University School of Law. So to have that environment where I'm working with Professor Margaret Burnham, who is a legacy of the civil rights movement. Her father is Louis Burnham. He was involved with the student youth group that was in Birmingham, and they were kind of affiliated with the communists. And so they got run out of Birmingham. And she was a child at Birmingham. Her friends were at, the 16th Street Baptist Church. She was friends with Angela Davis. They grew up together. And she was a child when they had the demonstrations in '63 with Project C and Wyatt T. Walker. So, just to be sitting at her feet and to learn from her, but not just to talk about the lynchings as we understand, the violence that, because it was a law school, they were concerned with the legality of unsolved civil rights cases. And so as an archivist, not only was I understanding the history of what happened during this time, but in terms of the litigation, how far did the court trial get? And so to understand that there is no statute of limitation on murder, and that, it really like chasing you to the grave. And so we had situations where people confessed on their deathbed about the horrible things that they had done, relatives finding papers and journals, and then, contacting the families of the victims and saying, I am so sorry about my grandfather. These people who are no longer living in the South, that they have the anonymity, that they have the safety to be away from the South, away from, public opinion, that they can then take a stand and say, this was wrong. Racism was wrong. White supremacy was wrong. So we had so many different aspects. And you want to talk about a living archive, in our archive, and I say archive because I'm very possessive about it. We try to look at the individual holistically, that he was a father, a husband, a son, an uncle. And, we tried to retrace his life and her life, because we had, some women were in our case files as well, but to retrace this person's life and to understand if they were in the military, we tried to obtain their military service records. If they, had a business, that we had information about the business. Of course, it all starts with a newspaper clipping, and you find out that this horrible atrocity has happened. And from there, working backwards and working forward. Working backwards in the sense of the census, that you can place them there at this time, that the newspaper clipping, you kind of connect those dots and find out as much information that's being reported. And then to look at the discrepancies in the newspapers and how the newspapers are categorizing these crimes. And to say, like, the black press is saying one thing, the white press is saying another thing. The rural papers aren't reporting it at all. you know? And so it all varied. And we looked at, the states that basically the Confederate states, Arkansas, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi. And so from there, we also looked at police violence. And so, the lynching shifts, it looks different in 1880 and 1890. It looks different in 1910 and 1920. By the 1930s, it goes underground because you begin to have the South is starting to industrialize. And they're saying no company is going to build their business here if no one feels safe, if employees don't feel safe, if the town isn't safe. And so you had, of course, the white power structure that were, in the past, the plantation owners.
Mm.
Now they are the, industrialists, and they are investors, and they are saying it's about capital. And so calm down, we're not going to have all this mayhem. It's not going to be, where people feel like they don't want to come here. And
Mm.
so lynching goes underground in the 1930s. And then by the 1940s, you have a resurgence in terms of you have enlisted military officers
Mhm.
who are coming home after fighting for democracy,
Yeah.
that they realize, I still can't vote. I just, served my country. And we talk about democracy and we talk about the free world and equality. And they, found out
Too much narrative.
it wasn't parable. It wasn't
Yeah.
fair. So, the movement started in the 1930s, 1940s.
Mm.
There were union organizing, trying to organize tenant farmers and sharecroppers. During the Great Depression, when they had the New Deal, the two categories that were not qualified for assistance were sharecroppers and domestics. Everyone else got some kind of government benefit.
Why?
And the majority of African Americans, are, as you know, are sharecroppers and domestic workers.
Well, I
So
mean, I
there
know
was,
why, but was there a stated reason? Because like what you're saying is that there's the discrimination happening and simultaneously narratives being propagated that support that that violence and segregation, and also a narrative covering it up. If
well, I mean,
if
again,
there's this big government assist and this disparity, is there a documented narrative of why it's like that? Other than
there's not a
okay,
documented narrative. It's just, again, like when you talk about the discrimination that lies within the federal government.
yeah,
I mean, you're creating safety nets for people with stipulations.
mm.
And the stipulations were, well, these are the two areas that don't qualify for assistance. So,
And you're
it's like,
categorically eliminating people.
I mean, it's almost
Saying
like the
labels,
the
but
the GI
categorically,
Bill
yeah,
was, like if you served, you were eligible for the GI Bill. But
yeah.
the GI Bill, when it came down from the federal government, was administered by the states. And it was the states that made decisions of
And
who would be supported and what kind of, resource would be doled out.
and
So
the
it's
states
always,
become
it's a federal mandate, but at the state level is when it's distributed.
oh, okay, okay,
So
okay.
that's how they get around all this. Where does power lie? Does power lie in the state or does it lie in the federal government?
Aha. Okay. Okay.
So all that to say that as we're doing this research and we're creating this archive, we we also had a genealogist, and so the genealogist would do research and would connect families, and there were families who had no idea what happened to their uncle or what happened to their great grandfather. And so that was another part to, because we are the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project. The restorative justice piece was, people were buried without a headstone, and they had funds to have a headstone. There were individuals that they had a street named after them. So it was a lot of community engagement. It was a lot of, thinking about the families of the deceased,
Mm.
and making sure that they were a part of this. So it wasn't just about we're doing this research, we're trying to write these books, we're trying to do this, for the fame of the university. It was really about holistically connecting families and giving people closure.
Yeah.
You know, Communities. I mean, the entire community was affected by these, extra legal crimes.
In the
It wasn't
community,
just it
yes.
happened to this one person, it happened to everybody,
Everybody in the community, yes.
everybody in the community. So, we think about like right now we're dealing with how can people, as we're trying to find resources, how can they just be undocumented? Well, I mean, again, like 1920, 1930, 1890, what kind of documentation existed?
Hmm.
You're, almost like, under the table. You don't go and do paperwork. There's no social security number to track you. I mean, that just doesn't happen. It especially doesn't happen in the South.
Yeah.
So these people, there are so many situations where it just says unknown Negro, just body found in our archive, and we'll never know who this individual was. We only know what happened. And so it's not to sensationalize the murder. It's not to sensationalize any part of it. We don't deal with the castration and the burning, and that's not what the archive was for. It was really for like the legality of, trying to have a pinpoint of how many times does this sheriff show up in the database?
Well, to that, and I understand the story more broadly because I've talked to you about it more in depth.
Yeah.
However, what I would like to tease out in this narrative, it seems that there is extra legal, which means illegal going beyond the bounds of the law, but there's also the legal working in concert to create this dangerous environment for everybody not on the inside, everybody black and non-white. Because lynching, as we know it across the United States, isn't just a black thing. Whites, Mexicans, Asians, and especially black people are horrifically lynched. And something that you and our friend Dr. Barnes pointed out to me was that within U.S. culture, throughout its inception, lynching and better yet, public violence toward a quote unquote offender or something offensive winds up becoming a tradition that communities engage in. And it's not supposed to be an isolated murder, it is a public lesson. Like you say, the whole community was affected because the whole community participated and saw it. Everybody who was there and who learns about it is supposed to learn something about the rules, the quote unquote rules of how we do things.
Right. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because this is where we get into the understanding of lynching by definition.
Mhm.
The fact that it is extra legal makes it a lynching versus a murder.
Mm-hmm. That's important.
So there's the criteria of what makes it a lynching is not determined until 1940.
Mhm.
So as the Chicago Tribune starts collecting data sources in the 1890s. Now, again, think about that this is the beginnings of empirical science
Mhm.
and sociology and statistics. So journalists and sociologists are the ones documenting lynching.
Mhm.
So the Chicago Tribune starts keeping these statistics. And they're not calling it lynching, they're just keeping like murder statistics. Ida B. Wells, when she comes along, she takes those stats and she starts doing investigations because when her three friends get they're murdered, they have the grocery store in Memphis, Tennessee, and they are store owners. So of course, the narrative of lynching is that it is, a crime of justification because black men are raping white women. It's the protecting the chastity and the purity of white womanhood.
Mhm.
And it's, men protecting, white women. And so the narrative becomes that, people who are stepping out of line in any possible way. I mean, the whole list of reasons to be lynched are just, from the ridiculous to the macabre. It's like skipping stones, you can be lynched. Harming an animal, you can be lynched. I mean, like the black codes, the same black codes that they used during slavery, that you couldn't have alcohol, that you couldn't have a firearm. Those black codes gets transported to Reconstruction.
Mm.
And then it's like, looking at a white man in the eye, you could be lynched. Testifying against a white person, you could be lynched. Striking a white person, you could be lynched. So all your civil liberties that are gained in the 1865 and 1866 Civil Rights Bill, 1875 Civil Rights Act that's overturned in 1883, all these civil rights and civil liberties that African Americans are gaining, they're slowly and publicly, taking them away. So of course, economic competition. You're a farmer. Your farm is bigger than mine. I mean, there were the level of land ownership, black land ownership. It wasn't just about 40 acres and a mule. There was, if you see the numbers of black landowners, it was just impressive at what they did 5, 10 years after emancipation. I mean, the gains that were made between 1865 and 1880. And so this is when you see the backlash of all this happening, that they're gaining voting rights. Black men are gaining voting rights, that they have land, that they are building schools. I mean, they are an impressive group to just, 4 million people that recently emancipated. And everyone's writing about this, and they're writing about the skills and the perseverance of the black community. The level of economic cooperation, the businesses, all these transferable skills from slavery that they are transferring into freedom and becoming, caterers, hotel owners, because of segregation and Jim Crow, that they're making a way for themselves. And a lot of these services are also catering to white people. So it's like, the barbers that we know of, you go to the barber on Saturday, that was not what barbership was in the 1880s, 1890s. It was a high class establishment shaving white men.
Mm.
So like you talk about, like, for example, all the black insurance companies, they came from the mutual aid groups that existed during slavery.
Yeah. The need for,
that you pooled your resources. You had a burial society. If somebody died, they inherited, they had a policy. That's where our insurance companies come from.
Because there was lack of institutional support otherwise.
But that's what white people are doing. I mean, we're just modeling and doing exactly what needs to be done in terms of a society. You have to have you get sick, somebody's got to look after you, and not everybody has family. So like these kinds of like beneficial, and this is, part of when I'm talking about philanthropy, this comes from it, that whole idea, am I my brother's keeper, So when there's philanthropy, there's reform. So 1880s, 1890s, Ida B. Wells starts looking at these lynching statistics, and she starts doing research to show that it's not about rape. So most of the cases that she studies and looks at the scenario, she's like, these were consensual relationships between black men and white women, whether the women were single or whether the women were married. She's like, this was consensual. This was not rape. And so, of course, they run her out of Memphis. They burn her printing press. There's a bounty on her head. She goes to New York. Then she goes to Chicago. So, they run her out of the South. So Ida B. Wells is doing this work. So then after Ida B. Wells, while she's doing this work, she's doing it as an independent journalist. She has a newsletter, The Headlight. She's publishing in her newsletter. She writes the pamphlets, Southern Horrors, the Red Record. She's writing these pamphlets, and she's doing it, again, selling the pamphlets, trying to raise money. She goes to London in, I think it was 1895, and she's on the circuit, and she's, talking about lynching publicly and internationally. Now she's on a global stage. So again, she's a woman. Is this something a woman should be doing? So, she's far ahead of her time. She's a club woman. They're doing things in terms of service and community. A lot of women don't like what she's doing. A lot of women are saying she's not qualified. She shouldn't be talking about these things. So once she's doing it, then Monroe Work, who was from Iredell, North Carolina, he is a sociologist, went to University of Chicago. And again, sociologists and journalists, they're the ones documenting lynching. So he gets a job at Tuskegee with Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington hires him as a statistician to keep track of where are the Tuskegee graduates after graduation.
Mhm.
So he starts this office of research, and that's what his job is supposed to be doing. But meanwhile, Monroe Work is a Pan Africanist, so he's writing about Africa and documenting what's happening in Africa. He is a contemporary of W.B. Du Bois, who another sociologist.
Mhm.
And so he is keeping stats on Negro life, just like Du Bois, like the Philadelphia Negro, what are we doing? Progress of the race. So every year he publishes these annual statistics, this Negro Digest. And part of that digest is lynchings.
Mhm.
So he is modeling Ida B. Wells, looking at the lynchings. He hires a he's part of a subscription service where they get all the newspapers, and they just sit in the office and they're just clipping newspapers, and they're clipping newspapers, and they attach them to a poster board, and they write the year, and they give it a title. And that was the Tuskegee Archive, the lynching archive.
Mm.
And that's where it starts. And it was, so whenever anybody needed statistics about it, they would contact Tuskegee. And every year they published 1922, here are the number of lynchings, 1923, here are the number of lynchings. They didn't get granular. They didn't talk about, all the ways that people died, but they were basically like, here are the numbers, here are the stats.
Well, that brings up an interesting subplot to this narrative, that within that there becomes a discrepancy in the discourse, like you mentioned earlier, or of not only constitutes a lynching, who gets to talk about it and how.
And again, this is the rub, because as he's publishing these stats, states are clapping back and saying, no, I disagree. That wasn't, we don't consider that a lynching. And the other piece to it is the NAACP also starts to keep their own statistics.
Mm.
Now, the difference between the two, Tuskegee University is a research institution. NAACP is a membership based organization.
Mhm.
So they want the numbers to be higher so they can have interest in people joining the NAACP, and they're trying to pass anti lynching legislation. So if the situation is dire, then we have to have, how can they not say we need a hate crime bill?
Mhm.
And so there's discrepancy between Tuskegee and the NAACP, that Monroe Work was very conservative about what he considered a lynching. Like, he didn't consider race riots. He didn't count those people if they died in a race riot, like Elaine, Arkansas, for example. He was like, that's not a lynching.
Why not?
So that's, again, the category of, well, I think if it's, for example, two brothers that are, protecting their white sister, and they killed the black sharecropper, that's not a lynching.
Mm. Okay.
So then, the criteria had to be, one, it's extra legal. Like, the person was accused
Mm.
and he was detained, incarcerated, being held, and they broke him, kidnapped him from the jail, or they kidnapped him on the way to the jail. Then that makes it extra legal. They're being judge, jury, executioner, and he's not seeing his day in court.
By that
That's what makes it extra
definition,
legal.
by that definition, Emmett Till is not a
A
lynch.
lynching.
It is
It
because
is.
he was never brought to jail, or was
He
he?
was accused.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
Judge, jury. I mean, again, you have to have been accused. It has to be, two or more, three or more people, I think. There's like four criteria that they use. And if I was thinking about it, I would have pulled it up. But it's like, by the 1940s, there are four criteria that constitute what is a lynching. So even again, Emmett Till being considered a lynching was not until like the last 10, 15 years. In 1955, it was not considered a lynching. It was a murder.
See, that's what I'm saying, because okay, I'm imagining scenarios that were very real. The Across California, across the West and the Midwest, and even in some northeastern states, there are what is called sundown towns. Imagine Armando Collins just spry and walking through a place he's never been at around 7:30 on a fall afternoon. Sun has gone down. Now, someone or someone's could stop me and say, "You look just like that guy who did that thing." And I wind up harmed because of it. How is
Yes.
that not a lynching?
By definition, I mean, if you were accused and publicly accused and you were assigned to that crime,
Mhm.
and this individuals, it has to be more, it can't be two, it has to be two or more.
Okay.
And again, it's like
That's a weird criteria.
judge, jury, ex. I mean, it's gray, but by definition, again, like I guess I would say black people considered it a lynching.
Yeah.
White people may not.
Yeah,
But
the terms are slippery and
Margaret Burnham's father, Lewis Burnham, wrote about Emmett Till. I mean, she was 9 years old. I mean, when I say she's civil rights legacy, I mean, she's sitting at her father's knee and he's telling her about Emmett Till.
mm,
You know what I mean? And so he writes about the killing, the murder of the lynching of Emmett Till. He writes about it. And I mean, this is the 50s. We have like We Charge Genocide, all that is coming out. And that's like on the world stage. And so and again, it's slippery. This is why it's difficult to get this anti-lynching bill passed because there is no concrete definition of what constitutes a lynching.
mm,
The bill is being circulated like in the 1920s and again in the 1930s. And it goes into three or four different iterations. And it passes on the House, but it doesn't pass on the Senate. So, I mean, like it's building traction. But then at the same time, it's like, it's gone underground. Like when it's first circulating in the 1920s, I mean, it's at its peak.
mm.
And then it goes underground and it gets quiet again and then it resurfaces again, but it looks different. And so they then decide, and there are so many groups now vested in this idea. You've got the Southern white women. They're a group of anti-lynchers because they're basically saying like, we don't feel unsafe.
Mm.
I'm telling you, as a white woman, I don't feel threatened by a black man trying to rape me. Like that's not my reality. And so this hysteria, this panic, this fear, not all white women, Southern white women feel this way.
Mhm.
So there's, the interracial commission, like all these groups are kind of, and then interestingly, that University of North Carolina of Chapel Hill, a lot of this intellectualism that's happening at the academy, it's
Mm.
happening at Carolina.
Mm.
And so Arthur Raper, who writes about lynching, he does an economic study where he says it's regional, it's based on the South and the economy, and cotton season is high and lynching and all that. So he's a fellow at Chapel Hill.
Mm.
You have John Colbert, who writes about lynching in the law. He's coming out of Carolina. All these groups are coming out of Carolina. So it's like they have a commission. It's like a think tank. And one of the person sitting on the panel is Charles Johnson, who was at Fisk University. So there's all these, it's interracial, it's interdenominational, it's academic. So there are the science of lynching, people studying lynching as a science, how to have talks about this. Like if you were going to have a public conversation about this. And then you've got, again, local governments who are saying, we have to do better. This is not a good look for us. We just can't be snatching people out of jails. And so again, there are laws on the books that say if your sheriff or your deputy is complicit, then the state has to pay a fine to the victim's family. Of course, they're going to say it's not a lynching because the state doesn't want to be bankrupt.
Mm.
So
Mm.
there's all these measures that there's putting on the books that they're saying no, like the sheriff, he saved the prisoner. He disrupted the mob. He sent them away. They were armed. He dissuaded them, disarmed them, and the person, they spirited him away. And the sheriff is a hero. So there's all that other side to this.
Well,
So
what
yeah.
this research does is it kind of puts flesh on the skeleton, and in ways humanizes the story in ways that the surface narrative doesn't. The way I think about lynching is the way a lot of people think about lynching. It is a murder. It is perpetrator and victim.
Well,
Like
most people
in
think
terms,
about lynching as a noose, like they just
yeah.
automatically think about the hanging, and it has nothing to do with, the hanging came last.
Well, it's more than just yeah, and it's more than just method, and there are more people impacted than just the actors we talk about in the story. The
Absolutely. And
way
but
that you
lynching
talk about
lynching has been, in North America since the days of the Revolution.
hmm
It was 17th, 18th century. And by definition, back then, it was being tarred and feathered.
hmm
You
Oh,
lived,
that's
you
what
weren't,
tar and feathering is lynching. Well, it's a form of public punishment.
back
Never
then,
really thought about that.
that was considered a lynching. And I mean, you lived if you
Yeah,
weren't burned to death with the tarring,
yeah.
but
You
the
are
public,
publicly scarred.
like people who were like loyalists who went against the colonists, they were lynched. They were tarred and feathered.
That's what I'm talking about. It's not just to teach the person a lesson. It's to
It
teach the
is,
community a lesson.
well, again, the public display of it, but lynching is also as covert as it is overt.
hmm
I mean, so many killings happen in the marsh, in the woods, that we just don't know. They just found the body.
Yeah, yeah.
And so like none of it is all about, those spectacular lynchings of the 1880s, 1890s. That's what we think about lynching. We have all these stereotypes that have been ingrained in us as to think about what is a lynching. That we think about the person is, chased and beaten, and then they're hung and they're on display, and then they're castrated and they're shot. I mean, if you think about like the hanging was really like the public display as a warning, the warning
Oh,
of, this is what can happen to you if you get out of line.
yeah.
I mean, you have situations where families didn't claim the body.
For fear?
Some were afraid to retrieve the body.
hmm
Some felt like it brought shame on the community. You were a bad person, you got what you deserved.
Mm.
And so as a family, now you've brought shame on the family, and now the community is looking at us as we're bad people because you come from us. So situations like that where, you have families not claiming the bodies. You have situations where the person was buried and the white folks came back and disinterred them and took the body away.
Mm.
So there's a lot to, the aftermath, that family's not allowed to mourn, that you're not allowed to, have a proper burial. I mean, like, how can you rest in the afterlife with that level of the trauma that continues even in the afterlife? And
Ab-
so that's really what my research is speaking to, the trauma,
mhm.
the trauma of lynching in terms of what happens to, the body as an archive,
Mm.
that you are an embodiment of the crime. You know how many bullet holes you have in your body. You know how you were dragged, if you were dismembered, like, and so the body itself is a record of the lynching.
Mm.
So whereas the coroner's report doesn't do justice and says this person died by hands unknown, where the police aren't doing an investigation, the body itself is, evidence of the scene of the crime.
Evidence of the crime.
You
And
know?
a story that needs to be told and is only told if one
Yeah.
side
I
wants.
mean, and this is what I was like, lynched bodies are posthumous archives.
Wow.
Posthumous.
Okay. What is the title of the book? And when is it coming out?
Okay, so the book actually, I received a National Endowment for the Humanities teaching fellowship to go to Indiana University, and the topic for this session, it was like a 3-week institute for college faculty. It was called Content Warning. And so basically, it was how do you handle, materials that are going to be sensitive? And I think about, everything we have in society is labeled. made in USA, or, made in China. This is organic. Like there's a label to tell you something.
Yeah.
But what about archives that this traumatic experience, you open that folder and who knows what it's going to be?
Mm.
That you read the finding aid and you think about all the things that are in this collection that may trigger you. And so the work actually, it comes from Australia, and groups that are involved with like native and indigenous communities, because they are dealing with the trauma of like the stolen generations of the abuse that happened. And so as these records, and these people are still alive and giving testimony, that they're talking about these horrible things that happened to them. We think about, religious organizations deal with trauma. There's counseling for that, that there's counseling for social work, that there's counseling for the medical profession. But what about archives, archivists, and librarians?
Mm.
That one, as you are acquiring these materials for the sake of preservation and access. So you are going out and you are, let's say, the descendants, the survivors, and you are saying like, let me help you, try to preserve this history. You don't want to re-traumatize them.
No, no, no.
Because now they've got I hadn't thought about that in years. And they go back and they look in the box, they look in the attic, they look in the, all the files, and they see images, they see the letters, they see the material culture, the artifacts. And again, it's like, I was a child. I didn't know how to process this. And now I'm an adult. And now I'm hearing like, what is the difference between memory as I know it and then memory as I imagine it would be or could be, and hearsay, and how that memory is tainted by time and space, and you've moved and relocated. You have all these other memories that are layered on top of those memories. And so archival trauma, is really to think about, or trauma archives, to think about, not only are you possibly, that you're thinking about vicarious trauma, that you are reliving and rehashing. As the archivist,
Mm.
you have trauma
Yes.
because you've now processed this collection. So as we talk about, we're digitizing things. So you're going back into the records and you're seeing them as they are in real time. And you're thinking, again, I got to tell my supervisor, I need a mental health day
Hmm.
because this has been heavy. So it's giving grace on so many levels. It's like, for the person who's doing the work, and for the person who is, part of the initiative, of the research, of the history. So the trauma, thinking about the content warning, it's a warning label. Just remember when they introduced like explicit lyrics or R-rated movies, like, and now you see it will contain violence, suggestive language, sexual impropriety or whatever. So archives are the same way. And
Mm.
so I did this fellowship, and I was like, okay, my initial idea was, because I was here, from North Carolina, I wanted to research the Quakers that left North Carolina that moved to Indiana,
Mm.
because there's rumor, not rumor, but there's people have said that the Quakers were affiliated with the Klan.
And they kind of got ran out, and it was some big.
No, they had Klan members that were Quakers and vice versa.
Okay.
Because they were like, we're Christian, like race, and so we think about the Quakers as being these abolitionists who had these big hearts, and so as they're leaving and they're going to Indiana, they're going to Indianapolis, and they're going to Bloomington, they're going to like Ohio, and they're in like Earlham, is based out of, it's founded in Indiana. So there, the Klan is resurfaced in the Midwest in the 1920s.
So are the Quakers
So,
bringing it with them or taking it
well, the Quakers are
assembling?
Quakers, and the Klan are there.
Yes.
So they're just part. They just find each other.
Okay.
And so it's not even like, I'm this religious person and I have these views that, they're white supremacists. It's just whiteness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they are just basking in whiteness. And so there are, all these kind of white nationalist groups, think about the doctrines of white nationalism. It's all Christian based, it's all
Yeah.
evangelical, it's all about purity and all Aryan, so it's one and the same. And
Mm.
so the Quakers are tied up. Someone's telling a story about his grandfather was a fireman and there was a cross burning, and his grandfather was putting out the cross burning, burning cross because that's his job.
Yeah.
Well, the Klan stopped him and he's like,
Something from
but the whole street could burn down. And they're like, let it burn,
if that ain't a metaphor for white supremacy in America.
let it burn. And so, like, when I was there, I had an Uber driver who told me a story about a woman who was, I don't know if she was from Indiana, but she was selling, I think, magazine subscriptions or something. And she was, this is the 60s, and she was with other people, and they were like together, you take the street, you take the street, and we'll meet later. And so she was like, well, I'm going to go back down here and like solicit this neighborhood. And I think the other people were white, and they were like, you sure you don't want us to go with you? And she was like, no, I'll be fine. And so she goes off by herself, and these two white men start following her. So she knows that they're following her. I don't think they've said anything, but they're harassing her. So she goes to a house, and they let her in, and she tells them, like, these two white men are following me, and they're like, okay, well, just stay here. So she stays for a little while, and then she decides, I think I'm safe, I'm gonna be okay. And they were like, are you sure? And she's like, yes, I'm gonna be fine. Well, the two white men are waiting, and they murder her.
My God.
And I don't know if it was unsolved for how long, but they caught them.
Yeah.
And so talk about restorative justice. Here we are now 40, 50 years later, and I guess it's not even a crime that people have talked about. It's not considered a lynching, but she was targeted for her
Yeah.
race. Well, they wanted to build a park and name it for her. And I think there's a marker, a historic marker, but they wanted to dedicate a park, and the mayor said no.
Why?
It was a long time. Let's just get over it. Like, she doesn't need a park. Like, no.
Re-traumatized. Mm. Mm. That's
And I was like,
oh,
I'd never heard
that's
of that story. And he was a white man, an Uber driver. And he was just like, because I told him, I was like, I'm here for this program. We're talking about lynching and content warning. And he was like, hey, did you ever hear the story of? And I was like, no, tell me more. So, yeah. And I've looked it up. I did, it's probably bookmarked in my file somewhere. And I'll be happy to share it with you. But just thinking about that off the top of my head, just having these exchanges, everyday ordinary people who have stories about racial violence, you know?
it's like it's like we've been saying throughout this podcast. The actual event, it creates a concentric circle of events to where you 50 some odd years later in a cab are hearing from an Uber driver of the story. You're impacted, and he is telling you this because he is impacted. The process of retelling our story, like these stories have to be told, but in the retelling, there's a catharticism that is happening,
Yeah.
not just for the person, not just for the story itself, but also for the person telling it. When you get told these stories, you can't you can't be desensitized to them no matter how far removed you are from them.
No,
The
no. And again,
retelling help.
you think about, victimization and just the innocence of just going about your daily life. And next, like,
Oh my,
was it your time? You know?
how is this going to be told and retold?
And again, as it's being retold because they have to do the research to nominate her for the park,
But
that it's documented that they're using the newspaper, they're using the trial, they're using all the transcripts. And again, this was part of the archive at the Civil Rights Restorative Justice Project. We've got the trial, we've got, the judge, we've got witnesses, we've got testimony, we've got all these things that are part of the record of this case. And so, not to separate it from any other kinds of lynching, but as we think about the documentation of how are we making this and sharing this information, making it public, It's public in historic markers. It's public in, the databases. Equal Justice Initiative has lynching, they have a lynching map. Now, unfortunately, it's not a resource where you can go and actually do research. But in terms of digitization and mapping, that you can map what's happening. And so, like here in North Carolina, when EJI starts in 2018, there's a cohort of individuals that go to North Carolina and discover, wow, we have one documented lynching. And that was Eugene Harrison, who was lynched in
Yeah.
1897. And so then that becomes, that the EJI, Equal Justice Initiative, EJI, that they have these public commemorations of lynching. And so it's the community's invited to research the lynching in their community. And it's a whole process of, a soil collection that, again, is supposed to be bringing about closure, that you collect the soil from the incident, from the spot of where it happened. And one jar stays in the community and another jar sits in the museum. And the name of the victim and the date of death is on the jar and the location. And it's just a wall. I think there are 500,000 jars. I mean, it's just walls and walls and walls of just jars. And so the other part to it is, you have these community conversations. Then it's supposed to be a student high school essay contest. So you've got the young people involved. Then from there, it's more dialogue. And so when you get to the point of having a marker placed in your county, that the marker talks about the lynching and what happened, and then you get a column, a pillar, and the pillar is placed in the community and a pillar is placed at EJI. And I think so far, I think maybe Chatham County has gotten far. Mecklenburg, they've gotten very far in terms of having the markers. Here in Guilford County, where I am, we've only done the soil collection. And so we've just step one of what the commemorative process is like. And this commemoration, it's families that are also, keeping the soil. And so it's again, it's about individuals and communities that are coming together and having these community conversations. And it's not just about white people are bad, and they did these bad things, but looking at the whole scenario of why it happened, the complicity of the police, the proximity to the railroad. I mean, all these things, like what was in play for all this to happen the way that it was. That this was a farming community and these people were, itinerant sharecroppers and workers or day laborers, and people were transient. This is how it happens. Did this person have family? And so as we talked about, like, connecting families, the descendants of Eugene Harrison, some of them were like, yeah, I'm not really feeling it. I don't want to come to the ceremony. Don't involve me. And, it was a hard time because you had to show that there's not just investment with the community, but there's investment with the families because everybody's looking for closure. So you want to have that other side of, it's really about the descendants more than anything. And you get these scenarios where the descendants, like, I didn't even know. Nobody even told me. You're researching my great grandfather and nobody even told me.
Yeah.
I live in New Jersey now. How would I know what's going on in North Carolina? So it's again, like, outreach and who's on these committees, and again, who gets to decide, and how does this person get to be remembered and commemorated? So long story.
Well, no, the
It's
perfect
that.
story. That is exactly why
Yeah.
I wanted to interview you. Most people don't. Okay, these little factoids that are second nature for you because you've been researching this for so long, so heavily. For our audience, a lot of this is revelatory. For me, I haven't. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new about something I thought I knew.
And
And
I mean, I take myself to task, because
Mhm.
I get so situated with that only African Americans were lynched. I know that only African Americans were. I'm African American. I'm only concerned with African Americans.
Yeah.
But the fact that, Asians were lynched, Italians were lynched, Mexicans were lynched, natives were lynched, white men were lynched. White men were lynched because they were wife beaters. And
Mm.
again, lynching is really about, like, we are keeping society in check,
Hmm.
and all way, shape, and form. So if we've got this white man who is a drinker, who's a gambler, who's a philanderer. It looks bad for a community. He's not a Christian. He's not acting. He's immoral. And we're going to be judge, jury, and executioner. And they, again, arrest him, beat him, kill him, and white men are lynched. White men are lynched. And what was disappointing, or I wouldn't say disappointing, but shocking, because I went to Tuskegee to the
Mhm.
archive, summer of 2023. I was like a visiting scholar,
Yeah.
visiting archivist, and I was just like, I just want to stand where Monroe work was and go through the collection. And it is in its original form. There are 144 boxes, give or take 10, 15. It's a whole bunch of boxes. And you open up the box and it's the same newspaper clipping glued to a, post board, filed in the same manner, and they've been microfilmed in the same order. There's no finding aid. It's just random. And so by the time I got to box like 98,
Mhm.
it's supposed to be chronological.
Mhm.
Well, you get to box 98, you got 1922 back again, 1921 back again. I was just like, these are so, I mean, so many people have come in and things are out of order. It's
Oh, okay.
disorganized. And so again, there's no finding aid. So it's like you don't really go in with an agenda of saying, I want to look at all the lynchings that are in this county during these years. Good luck. You're just kind of combing through everything. And so I had a finite amount of time there. And so I had a, small scanner,
Mm.
and I was just scanning newspaper clippings, just scanning everything that I could find. And when I got back, trying to make some sense and some order out of it, so I kind of have it arranged thematically. But there was so much violence against children. Children
Mm.
as young as 3 and 1 years old being raped, sodomized, murdered. I mean, it was just violent.
Vulnerability. Yes.
Oh, it was so violent. I mean,
Oh.
we talk a lot about Myrtle Vance, who was 4, and I
Mm.
think it was Paris, Texas, and Sam, I think Sam Houston, or I can't remember the person who was accused of murdering her, but they talk about her being lured to the field, him luring her to the field, and then raping her or whatever, but splitting her by her legs, like banging her up against a tree, and then she was split by
What?
her legs, like torso down. Like it was just savage, savage. And so again, it's like, how is this being recorded and documented by the press? I mean, it's all about, the black fiend, the person who, the heinous person who did this horrible thing. And so just to read about the children that are being killed is heart wrenching. Because again, like, people are at work. There's no babysitting. There's no daycare. You're
Yeah.
just kind of out and about. Kids are out in the field. They're
No
wandering
gentle
around.
parenting or yeah.
And you got like 8 year olds babysitting 2 year olds,
Yeah.
And so children wander off and they get snatched and they get, and of course, like how many of these crimes were actually committed by the relatives,
Mm.
and then blamed, on a black person,
Yeah.
a
Some stranger
scapegoat,
who walked through town.
and so of course it's always going to be a strange black man in town because these were like paid workers. And so you just went from, county to county to county, town, trying to find work. I'm going to be, in the orange groves this season. I'm going to be in the turpentine marshes. I'm going to be at the sawmill. I'm going to be, so it's like these are the camps, and these people are outside and they're just laborers. And so, of course, there's no money, and you just kind of moonshining and distilling whiskey or whatever. So there's this whole element of like lawlessness. And so this is all about like when they call it, extra legal, like the wheels of justice turn too slow. So this is why as they're arrested and held in jail, well, we can't wait for a trial. We can't wait for the judge. What if this person gets off? Because that was happening.
Well,
The judge was saying this person didn't do it. And they're like, well, we know he did it. And we got the man, even though he's not the man that she said he was. She said he could be, and they're just snatching up a black man. And they're like, well, we got somebody and we need to be satisfied and make sure that justice is done.
I love the term extra legal because when you say crime, it makes it seem as if whatever happened is the exact polar opposite of what lawful and is lawful and is state sanctioned and supposed to happen.
Right.
Extra legal to me suggests that what happened is criminal. However, it is an extension of the legal.
Not necessarily. I mean,
Uh,
extra legal, it just means it's
It,
out of the realm
well, I'm
of
talking about
legality.
morally
Morally. Yeah, I mean,
on this
it's
white
not like,
African.
it's like, like expedited. Like it just doesn't make it like, times two or 3.0. It's just meaning that it's out of the regular judicial system. That makes it extra legal. And so it's just kind of like, again, calling these murders, calling them killings, like it is a lynching. Like again,
Mhm.
the definition, and I really should pull it up while I'm sitting here, but I don't want to disrupt the flow. But
Oh, that's fine. I'll put it up. I got it.
by the and again, the definition by 1940, it becomes constituted, as in when you define what is a lynching versus a killing, this is what makes it a lynching. And so there has to be this criteria has we checked all these boxes.
Mm,
Yes, that is definitely a lynching because there was no consensus.
mm,
And the states are saying one thing because again, they've got these laws that say if the state is liable, if the sheriff is complicit, if you see, if you can prove that the mob came and the jailer handed the keys over
yeah.
or just left his post, then the state has to pay reparations,
Yeah.
compensation, and again, like we're not gonna pay.
Mm,
We're not going to pay. Like
that's
we are not
double
like there was a law.
victimization.
I always talk about like back in the, 1830s, 1840s, I think. There was a law that if you caught a fugitive and they went before the judge, if you proved that the person was a fugitive, you got $5. If you couldn't prove that it was not a fugitive, then you didn't get anything. So of course you're gonna prove that it's a fugitive, so you can get your $5.
That's so pulling from that last one because I always teach about Solomon Northup, 12 Years a Slave, and how well this semester I've been relating it to immigration and how the idea of the legal, the citizen, it is contextual and almost a salve because there are examples of it breaking down what is lawful, breaking down in the lives and experience of someone because of what else is lawful. His story, it leads to what you're saying. The fugitive slave law doesn't, it says that Southern owners can send themselves or their agent to the North to find an escaped slave. And there is a reward to an agent for doing so. And there is a rule that in the South, Black people have no voice or agency. No matter what comes out of your mouth, it's not words.
Unless a white person vouches for
Yes.
you.
Yeah. Well, this creates a social and economic environment where profiteers are just snatching Black people off of the streets. Let the courts figure it out. Give me my money.
Exactly.
And I
So
think,
not only are you profiting from, the payout from the court, then you sell this person and you get that money. So there's the business of kidnapping and reselling and so interesting. Like when I was saying that the Quakers are moving, I'm seeing documentation from white slave owners with their mixed race offspring that are asking the Quakers to take their children with them when they go north so that they are not kidnapped and re-enslaved. So keep in mind, there are a bunch of people who, these children, of course, they go to Ohio and Indiana and Wisconsin or wherever, and they're adopted by white families. So they are raised white and don't know
That
if,
this is
if they're light enough, fair skin enough, and they're being, and so you're now talking about 3 generations later that you've got all these people in Cincinnati who are like, I'm a blue blood, Cincinnatian. And it's like, no, you came from North Carolina and your father was a slave owner and your mother was a slave mistress. And you are, according to what the one drop rule,
yeah, you're right.
you're black.
That's kind of where I think we are right now, like history repeating itself.
Well, again, that's why like it makes race so ridiculous. Like that have these quantifications and qualifications. I mean, I can't tell you like I'm so when they talked about eugenics and the science of race, that there were all these trials and court cases where they actually made people disrobe,
Mm-hmm.
on the stand, and it's like they're measuring the slope of their brow and their foot, the bone to the ankle, all this ridiculousness of, well, this person is an anguloid and this person is a caucasoid, and like based on what?
Based on what one drop rule, we've said this a billion times, and so much so we think it's naturalized. But nobody ever stepped back and said, who the fuck had DNA evidence of what drop anything? What
And
is
again, why does that make you different?
yeah,
Because you do have this, characteristic, or what? I mean, again, like what race can get sickle cell and what race could get Tay-Sachs disease and what race could this, it's like,
who's
all
ever
right,
half of their dad and half of their mom all at once? Like you
all
know
right,
what I'm saying? It but
yeah,
this is but we
we could
said
talk about this
we
all
yeah,
day.
no, and we said it earlier. Whiteness it don't need logic. In fact, it'll do away with all of that just to satisfy itself.
I mean, again, as now as we talk about the contemporary and where we are today, that they're trying to dismantle, the notion of enslavement, of what it meant, and to say that it was benign and it wasn't so horrific, and that there were advantages as opposed to all these disadvantages, like slavery wasn't all bad. And I say to that, like, one, there's no such thing as a good master,
Never.
never. And then two, like, only in North America under the British was slavery hereditary. Yes, all societies had enslavement, but again, as you could marry in, you could marry up, you can get baptized and win your freedom, you could become whatever.
Mm.
And there were stipulations where it was fluid. I mean, even as you say, like, with the slavery that was in New York when the Dutch were there before the English came in the 1660s, that was a different quasi kind of system.
Mhm.
The slavery that was in New Orleans, with the French and the Spanish, again, you had white godparents, you had privileges, you had other kinds of, because you were Catholic, different kinds of, like you had different types of ways that you could kind of maneuver in the system. Only with the British that again you took on the characteristic of the mother, and even then it was a slippery slope, because if the mother was a white indentured and the father was African, that child, if it was a girl, was enslaved until the age of 18, or a boy until the age of 25. Well, if you're supposed to take on the hereditary of the
Mm.
mother's an indentured. So it's like,
Mm.
oh no, but wait, we gotta, have this kind of stipulation. But again, like in the colonial period, 18 is middle aged.
Exactly.
You basically were enslaved. You were put to work out in the field at the age of 3. At 3, you could weed, you could feed chickens, you can pick up sticks. I mean, everybody was working. Like, yeah, the children were in the field, they were playing, but they were still working. They were still enslaved. They were still present. You were fanning flies, you were doing something. And so this idea of, it's so like they were taught skills, and they learned how to be blacksmiths, and they learned how to be masons, and they learned all these things that if they were still in Africa, they'd be primitive. It's like
Aren't we
hogwash,
just reifying the bullshit
hogwash,
white narrative that all of us have been? I thought we jumped out of it. Now you're just gonna put us back into it. And if
hogwash.
slavery didn't matter, why is it so important to retell the story in ways that are soft, kind, and gentle to white people? If you're not a slave master right now and you're not racist right now, racist slave masters in the past and what they did should not have any emotional attachment to you. However, I know it does. And that is why what is happening is happening.
Well, again, like you can say historically, not all white people own slaves. That is true. However, they hired slaves.
Mm-hmm.
They benefited from slave labor. They
Mm-hmm.
benefited from, again, insurance, railroads, taxes, tariffs, currency, agriculture, architecture. There was not one thing that is in this country that did not have a thumbprint of slavery attached to it. Not one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Shipping industries, whaling industry. I mean, you can go all the way back to the colonial period.
Mm-hmm.
Domestic slavery, it wasn't all agricultural. There was industrial slavery. I mean, in West Virginia and those coal mines, they were enslaved people working. They didn't just grow cotton. It was tobacco, it was hemp. You need hemp to bind barrels. It was sawing wood. It was, again, blacksmithing, metallurgy, like every single thing. Not just, and then, the other thing is Southern farms did not grow food. They grew tobacco and they grew cotton to sell. It was Africans, enslaved Africans, that had small provision grounds, small plots of land that they grew food and they were selling to white people.
Mm-hmm.
Food comes from New Jersey. It comes from the middle states. That's why New Jersey, their slogan is the Garden State. People from Virginia moved to
Virginia
New
to
Jersey
New
to
Jersey.
farm. The
Oh,
middle colonies grew food. The middle colonies fed the South. The South did not grow food.
mm,
And if they grew food, it was, like to feed the animals.
yeah.
But Africans, enslaved Africans were the ones that grew food to sustain their diet because they were so poorly fed. And I mean, they were the ones that grew watermelons and okra and all these other things that are indigenous to West Africa.
Mm.
So, there's so much that they lie to us about, and so much that we believe the lie. In state of Maryland, enslaved Africans had the corner market on chickens. They had to pass a law that they could not sell chickens or eggs because it was a monopoly.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Because they were savvy enough to Africans savvy enough to raise chickens. Again, white people aren't thinking about where the food comes from. It's African Americans that are selling eggs and selling chickens and selling chicken dinners. As the trains are coming through, there's a great book. Famke Williams, I think is her name. Um, Psych, Psych Williams, I think is her name. She has a book called Building Houses Out of Chicken Legs. And she talks about foodways and how African American women have a culture of, when the trains would come and stop at the depot, that they would come out with a platter and selling fried chicken, to the people on the train as an industry, as a business. And basically the book is about how selling these foodways built institutions, how they used those resources to sustain institutions and build communities. It's called Building Houses Out of Chicken Legs. It's fantastic. And she's at University of Maryland. Fantastic book.
Mm. Well, Dr. Jones, I have kept you over my allotted time.
Oh,
I'm
oh
trying to
no,
be respectful of your day.
no. But I didn't even get a chance to talk about the book. So my book, when it comes out, I'm finishing it now. It's under review, but it's based out of that fellowship that I had, content warning. So it's basically a undergraduate reader with documents, and I've only situated it in North Carolina, and it's called The Smolderings of War, and it talks about post emancipation and the Reconstruction era to the 1970s, 1980s, about these kinds of each section talks about the level of racial violence, and then that has historical documents from the archive that you can pull from, and then of course it's a resource, it's a teaching resource, that there are questions for discussion, and then it's going to be printed, but we'll probably make it available in an electronic source so that everything is live and accessible. So that's the one book. That's the first book, and then the second book is I'm doing a case study about a gentleman that was castrated based on a Ku Klux Klan initiation in 1957.
What is the title of that book?
That book is called Blood Oath, and it's about Judge Edward Aaron, and 1957. It was Labor Day weekend, and he was walking through the woods on a date, and there were six men, and they were trying to prove themselves. It was a Klan initiation, and so the mandate was you need to go out and do something, catch a nigger, and they saw him, and kidnapped him, put him in the trunk, took him back to the clavern, where they met, and they beat him sensibly, and they castrated him. Just said, "Do you want your life or your balls?" Basically.
What are the names of your publishers for each one of these?
The first book is going to be published under Living Places Publishing, and that's why it's in North Carolina, because they like titles that are kind of regionally
Yeah.
situated. And so it is because working in the library, it's a library press. It's favorable to
Yes.
library presses. And so I thought, well, this would be an appropriate book. It's a young press. I think the press is maybe 6 years old, but it's really growing. And then the second book, I'm actually doing it as a book on Scalar.
Yeah. Oh,
So like an e-platform. And so that
yes.
way, like the text will be there and you'll be able to be guided, electronically through the sections of the book. And so I have, as resources, there's an interview where he lived, and so it's an interesting story because he is minimally incapacitated just in general. Like he's a handyman. He's not involved with the civil rights movement. And so, of course, this is in the midst of Fred Shuttlesworth. I mean, it's outside of Birmingham. And so he's not part of the movement, but they kidnap him and they're basically, taunting him and saying things like, you tell Shuttlesworth that this is going to happen if he tries to integrate schools. And so what happens after they castrate him is they pour turpentine on the wound, which probably saved his life because it cauterized the
Yes.
wound. And so he was just they dumped him in the river, and he crawled and lived. And the police found him and picked him up. And the unfortunate thing was because the shock and all the trauma that he had experienced, he was basically on the streets
Hmm.
begging and incapacitated and just kind of like in a catatonic state all the time. And the fact, because of the wound, he required a shot because his testicles would swell. And so he was always like begging, trying to get money to get this shot. And so what happens, there's a minister, Reverend Herbert Oliver, who is not from Alabama. I think he's from New York. And he comes and he sees him and he starts asking, well, the community, what happened to this man? And they're like, oh my God, it was horrible. He was kidnapped and the Klan tried to, they did this to him. And so he found out, he did research. He found out that he was a veteran, and he ended up getting a small pension for him, and then he could be eligible for veteran services. And so, I mean, he could never work again, physically. He just wasn't able to do anything. He couldn't lift anything manual. He couldn't pull anything. And he was, basically like a handyman, and he couldn't work anymore. And so at some point, he left Birmingham or Alabama, and he moved to Dayton, Ohio. And he passed, I think, in 1991. So, again, this is just a story that is not talked about. But for white people, like it was such a heinous crime. It was so sensationalized. And then of course, like Governor Wallace, George Wallace, pardoned the men. Like two turned state's evidence, four went to trial. I think they were sentenced to 20 years, and then Governor Wallace pardoned them.
Well, for stuff like that, it wasn't there a rule or a disagreement in the law and the discourse. If the person didn't die, it wasn't considered a lynching or something like that. Like
Well,
for
I mean,
if you
yeah,
survive.
yeah, but I mean, again, our archive had a lot of averted lynchings. There were
Yeah,
plenty
yeah,
of
yeah.
averted. I mean, that's how we know what we know, as much as what we know, because people survived. So yeah, no, that wasn't a lynching if you survived. But there's a whole, I mean, averted
What
lynching
is it?
is an attempt.
What is it considered then? You just got beat up, you got mugged, you got
Again, I mean, there are people who the rope broke
yeah,
and they got away.
yeah.
I mean, there's a like, again, because I'm interested in finances and lawsuits. There was a situation in Louisiana where this man was accused and was lynched, and then along as the mob is like, dragging him through the streets, they see a boy and they grab him and they try to lynch him, and the rope breaks and he survives, and his parents sued and won a judgment of $2,500.
25. I mean, a win is a win, but damn, 25.
Again, this is Louisiana. And not, New Orleans is different
Yeah.
than Louisiana.
Y-
New Orleans has a different, because it's cultural,
Urban,
it's
rural. Yeah, yeah,
cosmopolitan,
yeah, yeah.
it's French and Spanish. But when you get out into those parishes,
Yeah.
it's a whole nother game. Louisiana, New Orleans is a port city. They're used to having different types of, we'll
A
look
little
the
more
other way, and there's
cosmopolitan. Yeah.
different racial category. All that is just different. The Creoles,
Yeah.
all that is different. But outside of New Orleans, when you get into those parishes and you get into the where sugar and all those, far flung places, yeah. And so his parents won judgment. And so that's another aspect of research that I'm doing, like because you have like that law of if the sheriff is complicit, how many of those people sued the sheriff? I mean, I saw a newspaper clipping where there was a white woman who tried to sue the sheriff because her husband was part of the posse and he got killed. And she was looking
What?
for, yeah.
She's looking for a payday.
Be looking for, yeah, because the thing about it,
But
and that's the other thing. I didn't realize the difference between a mob and a posse.
what
A
is the difference between
posse,
a mob and a
a
posse?
posse has been deputized.
That's what I'm talking about, that fluidity of law
And
and
so because you're part of the posse, now it is about catch and kill. It's supposed to be catch and release, but of course, if you
yeah,
see them and you come upon them, then of course they're going to kill them.
on the
But
dead or
the
alive.
idea was apprehension, that you are now part of, go get the dogs, y'all go out, go into the woods, as many men as you need. And so they're basically deputized. I didn't understand that. So as an archivist, as I'm going through, you have to describe what the collection is, and I'm calling everything a mob. It's like,
Mm.
no, this
Yeah.
was a posse.
Ooh.
They were deputized. They had the right. It was like you're under the sheriff's jurisdiction, that
Yeah.
you lawfully have the right to pursue this individual. So again, like going back into the four tenets of what constitutes a lynching, and I got to go back and think about, is it a posse? If it's a collection of people, like was that one of the criteria? So now you got me thinking. But yeah, it was slippery. It was very slippery. And again, like Monroe Work and Du Bois are, I'm agreed, I disagree. Like he's very conservative because one, he doesn't want the stigma of being wrong to be attached to the university. It
Mhm.
is the reputation of the university. So people are coming out and they're saying, hey, you said there was only 6 lynchings in 1937. NAACP said there were 8.
So who's lying?
And who's right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Who do we believe? But then you've got the white press is like, oh, this is such a credible source. So again, like, who do you believe? That fact that black people are not credible to begin with, but who do you believe? So yeah. But I mean, it's good to talk about it because I'm always just in my head. And when you're in your head and you're trying to put it on paper, it doesn't always come out the same way. And it's like you
Hmm.
start like, maybe it didn't go this way, or maybe I hadn't thought about it enough. But it's always good to talk about it. And again, it's like I'm not an original researcher. I mean, there are people who've been doing this for 30, 40 years.
Hmm.
I'm new to the game, and I'm no more an expert than anybody else. But it's like, I think that the way that I look at it, and because what's changing is the restorative justice piece, that
Hmm.
it is about justice. And what does that look like? Because the whole idea is someone has done harm, someone has been harmed, and someone has committed harm. And so, more than just talking about this is a name, a place, and a date, like all the elements that are part of it, on both sides. White people are equally as traumatized by this as African Americans. Of course, not to the same degree,
Hmm.
but think about the children who grew up with this,
Hmm.
and the burden that they bear. I mean, so many stories come out about, parents telling the children not to look away,
Hmm.
or the fact that you are now so traumatized that you actually had a picnic while you watched some man burn to death.
Hmm.
I mean, it's just heinous. It's absolutely heinous. Walter White talks about walking along, and of course, phenotypically, he looks white. And
Hmm.
he comes across a group of white children, and they're like, "Hey, mister, want to see a dead body?" And
Hmm.
it's a man that's been lynched, and they're poking it and, doing all kind of things. And he's just like, I, this is a man who's just murdered,
Hmm.
and he's an investigator, and he's investigating and documenting, because he's infiltrating the mob, infiltrating the crowd.
Yeah.
And he's just like, I'm seeing this with my own eyes. I'm seeing how the crowd responds. I'm seeing the frenzy of it all. I'm seeing the mayor is there. All these important, the business community, everybody is there. It's not like good white people, bad white people. It's like these are, prominent individuals who have these, underlings doing their bidding.
From top to bottom. Yeah.
Most like the sheriff is an elected position,
Mhm.
you know? So, the minister's there. I mean, when they talk about like a
How
lot
do
of the
you go to
lynchings that
that
happen,
sheriff the next day and ask them to intercede on your behalf for justice? Like,
well,
not for that case. Like, just say, hey, my neighbor stole my chicken. After you saw the sheriff at a lynching of a person, whether they were guilty or innocent, how do you go to that person as a citizen and say, hey, I trust you to protect me and my interests?
again, imagine the lynchings, when we look at the photographs and we see that people are dressed in their Sunday best. Well, lynchings happen on Sunday after church. So the whole time in the church that there's the frenzy of, you see, that man is in the jail. You need to go get that man. And there's all the crowd's all riled up. Church ends and they march right down to the courthouse or right down to the jail cell and pull him out of jail. And the lynching is on Sunday, and people have food, and it's an all day thing, and they're just sitting out on the grass, and just partaking like it's a spectacle. And so again, like the spectacular lynchings, like 500 people, 1,000 people, they are, of course, advertising it. So it's like on Saturday, June 14th, this black fiend is going to be killed for the rape and blah 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 of, Sally so and so, and they are commissioning special trains
Hmm.
to make sure that
Yeah.
everybody can
Can
come.
get there. It's
So
like
it's a
events.
planned event. Like, we on this day and this time we're going to kill this person. Be there or be square.
And you know how long, like, what a run up time that has to be? Like, that isn't like, you came in and you got this viral text message. This is going on at 3 o'clock. No.
It's at least 2 days in advance.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you guys
At
are
least.
plotting this.
And you talk about the people who have arrived from all these far-flung places. Again, the railroads, like they're sending out a telegraph, a telegram, and going to, 3, 4 states over, giving you enough time to arrive. And it's like, then they build like a podium in the town square. Like it's all just, it's nothing spontaneous about it. There's nothing spontaneous about it. I mean, yeah, you get that occasional person who's just snatched and grabbed, but even that is contemplated. Like tomorrow night we'll go over there, we'll
Right.
get them, you
See,
know?
that's another misconception. Like mob justice is random torches and pitchforks. Hey, you guys, somebody whips everybody up. Nah, it's kind of like an ethos of lynching. Like you say, it's planned and premeditated for the thing that actually happens. But in the community, we kind of know that on Sundays, like one time, at least once this month, this is the
I
event
mean, like, yeah,
that's going to bring us together.
again, like you think about the people who took the photographs. They take the photographs and they're printing the pictures in real time, like their version of a Polaroid.
Hmm.
And so it's like you talk about technology. How has technology influenced all of this? One, telephones, telegraphs, the train, the technology of the camera, that you've got phonographic equipment that
Stage.
there's filming it like this is I mean I have a newspaper clipping from somebody who was like, why don't we get like some kind of like a Kodachrome so that it could be like a panoramic of the lynching, like after we take the pictures then we could sell it as like these panoramic
Yeah.
views. And I think about, like, my gosh, like you're making postcards of this and selling it. Now, granted, the mail is a quasi federal agency, but mail, things that are banned through the mail, you can't mail pornography. You know what I'm saying? Like there are like limits of what you can send in the mail. And these lynching postcards, the same way you go to Disneyland or you go to Las Vegas and you write on the back and hey, having a great time, saw this, saw that, wish you were here. So sorry you couldn't come with us. They're writing on the back, look at what we do to our niggers down here. Had ourselves a good barbecue last night.
Mm.
Crazy, crazy.
And like keeping souvenirs, like you know how we cut off rabbits' feet, have,
Again,
having black people's
people
ears.
talk about going into a store and seeing like fingers in a jar at the county store,
That's
or an ear on a keychain, like a rabbit's foot, like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
an
yeah,
ear.
yeah.
It's an ear, a human ear on a keychain. I mean, it just doesn't get more heinous and barbarous. And I mean, like, you could just talk about savagery. I mean, I've never, and I don't even read it like the sensationalism of it. I don't even read it to that degree anymore. When I first started, doing the research, of course you couldn't help but just think like, I can't even believe this. But now it's kind of like, yeah, no, I don't want to know. I already know. I already know how heinous it is. I already know how barbaric it is. I already know, just the lack of depravity of human life.
Yeah.
It's like extinction. And I mean, like, really, it was almost like, you know, we just got to destroy every aspect of this person. Not only do we have to dismember them, we've got to drag them, we've got to shoot them. I mean, they're like dead, dead, dead. We burn them, then we have the ashes and we grind it into the dirt. I mean, it's just like extinction, like out, you damn spot, like just out.
Well, the destruction of that human form in certain ways helps them make their human form, not just as individuals, but as a group identity. You
But
have,
again, like think about like fire is about destruction and it's also about purification.
but there's a difference between stabbing somebody, shooting them, and mutilating them. Like you know, like you say, dead, dead. There, if somebody shoots me in the heart with a bullet, okay, I'm more than likely gonna die. They know I'm gonna die. I know I'm gonna die. It is something totally different for them to shoot me in the heart, then stand over me with a knife, slice out my gallbladder, slice off my testicles, talk to me as I'm doing it, take pictures with my dead frame as I'm dying.
But
That is
again, like just the it's
psychology that,
about torture. Like they're
yeah,
doing all these things while you're still alive. And imagine like the lynching, like that you dangle them. So you pull them up and they're dragged, and then you give the, less tension so that they come down and they're gasping, and then you hoist them back up again, and then they're strangled, and then you just like a marionette, just a puppet, just up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. I mean, that is just cruel. Or just putting them on the fire pile and then just bringing more wood. It's not, the flame's not high enough, and the person is alive, being burned alive after being stabbed and shot. I mean, how do you have like 300 bullet holes? So was it like, 10 people shooting at you? Just repeated rapid fire.
you know how
You
sick
are
to me that
dead.
it is. You're shooting a person from multiple angles so much that you hit him 300 times. You know how many times someone else could have got hit? And the point is,
Again,
it's more than just killing or violence. There's something deeper and I argue sinister at play as it's happening. And I can't prove it. It's all
oh, it's very, again, the mysticism of it all. Like you think about just being in a trance of that much violence. You know what I mean? Like you can't look away. Like you see the flames getting higher and higher. You hear the screams, and everybody's like dancing in the frenzy, and you're just all like, "Oh my God, like this is great. This is amazing." And like, like it's like you could talk about like getting hard on that. Like getting
yes,
just everything about it
exactly.
is like the ecstasy
Yeah.
of all of it. Like incantations and the screams and just shouting and the revelry of it all. It's just a frenzy, just a mad frenzy. And it's like, then the newspapers are writing about, oh, the person didn't even cry in agony, like they just stayed stoic through it all. Never, had any words, never said anything, never shouted, never uttered any pain or said anything. I was just like, again, maybe they cut out their tongue and they couldn't say anything.
You mean to tell me you're describing all of that and that's what you're paying attention to? You sick people.
I mean, you know, and of course the like the person who is saying this is enough, and then they turn on him, and then they've got to spirit him away and put him on the train because he's about to be next, and then black and white,
Yep.
and so then this person ends up north, just the same way the abolitionists had testimony.
Mhm.
This person is given testimony, and this is what the white press is picking up on, that so and so was at this event speaking about the situation. And so again, like all of this is just, who is an advocate, who is, again, this is the same testimony that they're using for the anti-lynching, the legislation, just the same way that the abolitionists use the testimony of fugitives, the scars, the photographs, the writings,
Mm.
the dictation, as people were like, okay, well, let me record your story, let me see what happens. And of course, it's about sensationalism. It's also about selling newspapers. They're
Mm.
in a business. They're selling
Yeah,
newspapers,
yeah, yeah. I
you
mean,
know.
Fox News
But
has
again,
been around for.
lynchings happen in every state except for two. And I want to say Massachusetts and Vermont. I know Vermont is one.
I needed to know what those two states were.
I think I think it was Massachusetts and Vermont, but the lynchings happen in New Jersey, happen in Pennsylvania, they happen in New York, they happened everywhere. It was not just the South, and it wasn't just African American.
No.
And we talk about women. women who were lynched, children who were lynched. And I mean, the lynching, again, wasn't just about the news. People were shot.
Killed. Yes, yes.
They were shot, they were drowned, they were burned, they were, stoned. Anything imaginable, any way that you could kill somebody, they did it. You know, hog tied them. There was one situation where a 15-year-old boy was working at a store, and there was a white girl, the store owner's daughter, and he sent her a card. And the card said something like, "I hope someday we can be friends." And her uncle got the card and, of course, got his friends, drove to the house. The parents were there, and they were like telling the father, "Go get your boy. You all get in the car." So the father and the son get in the car. They go to the river. I don't know what state this is. I can't remember. Maybe Florida. They get to the river, and they're basically telling the father, "Beat him." And the father's like, again, like, "These men are gonna kill me. They're gonna kill both of us." So he beats his son. Then they tie him up, and they're basically like, "How do you want to die?" And they throw him in the river, hogtied. And of course, he drowns. The father, they return home. And so, of course, the trauma of, "I just seen my son get murdered." The parents pack up everything.
He had to beat his own son before he watched them murder him.
And the parents, pack up and they leave. But he, again, gives testimony. I don't know if he talks to the FBI, but there's an affidavit, and he talks about, I mean, they have the card. The card is, part of archival facts, like his writing, what the card says. And so again, the girl, like, I don't know what happened to her, what she has to say about all this.
How does she live with that, knowing that she's...
This is what I'm saying. Like, this boy, the innocence, again, like, there's not even like an innocence of youth, like to have a crush on somebody.
Mhm.
And I don't even know if the card was romantic. He was just basically like, "I hope that someday we can be friends." And it was like, "No, you're gonna rape this girl." And, the uncle took it upon himself. And so, of course, they knew who did it. They arrested them. They got acquitted. They got off. But it was like the uncle, and they named them. They knew who they were. These people show up unmasked, just show up. Everybody, it's a small town. Everybody knows who you are.
Everybody's in on it.
They know who you are.
The Klan ain't just, farmers. It's the judges. It's the teachers.
It's the pharmacist. It's everybody in the community. The gas station attendant. It's everybody in the community.
This is the one thing that they all agree on, irrespective of class, background, religious affiliation. This is the thing that they tend to agree on.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, this is whiteness. And there's another really good book. Well, I thought it was going to be better, but it ended up, it's only not good because it's in like a small town in Texas. But it's called Lynching to Belong. And it talks about the immigrants that come to this small town, and they're not white, but again, like, what is white? What is whiteness? And so lynching to belong, because I'm now lynching, I'm now white.
Yeah. Oh, one of the initiations into quote unquote whiteness from the 19th through 20th century is demonstrable anti-blackness.
Oh, absolutely. But again, the joke is, how do you know that you're a citizen? Like, because you know every derogatory phrase or slang for other races.
Wow. But it's a
Guinea,
joke.
guinea, wop, kike,
Yeah.
all that. So when you can do the gestures and you know who's who, then it's like you are now an American.
Oh, last myth I want to bust. Lynching is you've talked about it. Rape tends to be one of the if not number one of the
It's
top.
the predominant.
But what is the number two? Is there another? Is
Economics.
economics?
So it's basically, if you are a successful farmer, like, there's a really good book, Joanne Bowling. It's called The Penalty for My Success. And she writes about her father, Elmer Bowling, who was in Birmingham, and he was a trucker. He had his own truck, and this white man wanted him to drive for him. And he was like, I'm not going to drive for you. I have my own truck. I'm going to be independent. I guess he was a small farmer or whatever. And he was like, I'm not going to work for a white man. And so they murdered him, lynched him, shot him in his front yard in front of his, she was 4 years old. And the neighbor took her inside. And, and of course, this is the other thing. Like, there's always multiple stories about what happened. So for this situation, one, the book is called The Penalty for My Success, because he was independent, he was an entrepreneur, and he was murdered because that defies white supremacy. Mm-hmm. You can't be black and be successful. So that was one narrative. The other narrative was he was sleeping with a black woman, and the black woman was also sleeping with the white man. Mm. And so the white man, whether the Mr. Bowling was, saying, leave this woman alone, and the white man was like, no, she's mine, yeah, and killed him over that. And then there was another third reason, maybe land or something like that. But there's always like different versions of what is the real story. And so economic competition is again, not just having your own and being independent, but being like successful in the smallest way. Like, Ida B. Wells and her friends with the grocery stores. Economic competition, their store was outpacing the white stores. So whites were shopping there and African Americans were shopping there. They're good customers, good clientele. And again, that you can't be black and be successful. You can't be talented. I mean, that was the whole thing about, people saying accommodationalism under Booker T. Washington was not going to work. Because if you believed in thrift and morality and the value of work, and you were a success in any possible way, that defies white supremacy. So here you are, you're not voting, you're not joining a union, you're not doing any of these things to piss white people off. But yet, just because you've got a wagon and a strong horse, that you can possibly have a vegetable cart and be successful, or that your house is sturdier, or that your fence is painted and it's not lean-to, and that's the thing. Like, these conditions of the disparities of why places look the way that they do was because you couldn't let white people know that you had anything. I mean, just like why African Americans don't believe in banks. One, the Freedmen's Bureau, that their money was stolen. And two, if white people knew you had money in the bank,
they'd steal it. Or
they come and get you, and get that money. As soon as you made that deposit, they'd be like, hey, so-and-so was here. He just put in, his cotton came in, he settled, and he put the money in the bank. That's a recipe for murder right there.
Look at Jones, thinking he better than somebody.
Who is he to have money?
Oh, yeah.
We ain't got no money. Niggas don't need no money.
His nose in the air today, ain't he?
So it was a lot. And again, like the whole like entrepreneurship and, it was tough. It was like support black businesses. I mean, you still see the records of African Americans saying support black businesses. They know. They're like, okay, if you have a dry goods store, and this is what like Maggie Walker was saying in Richmond. She, was a banker, and she was like, you got to support the stores because one, they get their merchandise from white people. The white people are not going to sell black people the best merchandise.
Yeah.
And they sell it over cost. So you got to pass that cost off to the consumer. And so what happens in order to support the black business, you got to pay more, and you're getting inferior merchandise. But the fact that you are just supporting the business in itself, that you're supporting community. And this is something that we're still dealing with.
The fact that violence and inequality, like, show up in spaces just like that. Like it's one thing to be lynched physically. It is another thing to be tortured and brutalized economically and socially. Even if you're not the person being physically harmed, your very existence day to day on the macro and micro level are controlled by the people who were at the lynching, who would do the lynching.
But even the threat of the lynching, I mean, the fact that like the Ku Klux Klan, in 1870, 1871, they try to pass the Enforcement Acts, which make it illegal to be in disguise, harassing people. That is a very anti-Klan ordinance. And so the Klan, their whole point of the white sheets,
Yeah.
they're dealing with the fact that African Americans are very superstitious.
Yeah.
And so it's like we're gonna be haints and we're gonna haunt
On
you
you.
in at night in your dreams. I mean, this is
They
sheer
keep them the
terror,
specter bigger than they actually are. So I want the fear of me in you, even when
fear.
I'm here.
Exactly. Even when I'm not in your presence, when you go to sleep at night, that's what you're gonna think about. Like that we are just gonna come to your door and haunt you till you die of fright, just night riding. I mean, just grabbing people off the street and just whipping them for nothing, just
Well,
whipping them.
in Wilmington, when they deposed the integrated government right after
Well, I
Reconstruction,
mean, that's 1890. But
yeah,
again,
they
what's happening in the 1870s once those federal troops leave the South?
uh-huh.
I mean, it's you get to see like the gains that are made between 1865, 1868, and then pre 1877
Yeah.
when the federal troops leave the South. When the federal troops leave the South is when you begin to see the violence. So with that now, they don't have federal protection.
Mhm.
Every state, and the 11, 13 states that, were secessionist states, they have like a state's law that they're just basically like all the Congress, like they're taking notes, like what's happening, with the lawlessness. North Carolina was like book 3.
Mhm.
And the kind of shit, I mean, they just whipping folks for starting a school, you know, having caskets delivered to your front door as a warning. One white woman, I don't know what she did, but it was her and her daughter. They stripped her naked and beat the pubic hair off of her.
What? That is
I
oh,
mean,
now this is white people doing this to a white woman.
yes. Now her crime might have been sleeping with a black man.
I'm just saying. I'm just
But I mean, but they're beating up white people, white northerners who are starting schools.
yeah.
Like everybody is a target. Black men who were trying to vote. And so they had this whole thing about you didn't say that you were in the Klan. You said you were in the Knights of something something. So
Yeah.
that if you were arrested and asked, are you a member of the Klan? And you said no, you wouldn't perjure yourself.
Wow.
And they talked about, the initiations and the oaths that people took to be in these groups. I mean, this is paramilitary stuff, and it's so fascinating. And I have to go back and think where I read this. What happens with this whole Daughters of the Confederacy and how that they're able to regain, Southerners are able to regain their stature. There is a point when the women of the Confederacy start writing letters to other Southern states and saying, where are your Confederate veterans buried? And the first thing they do is they have like concentrated places where they can have their their deaths be memorialized. By law, they were not allowed to wear their uniforms. They weren't allowed to just be in public or anything. And so they had these ceremonies for the dead, where they were like, we should have parades and we should be allowed to wear the uniforms. And so that's how they start having this kind of like, commemoration. So it starts with the burial societies. So they have these burial societies. And from there, then it's like, well, now we're public and we shouldn't be ashamed, because that's basically what it was. You are treasoned. You are treasonous against the government. You don't have the right to appear and say nothing. And these women were like, no, be a man, stand up. So they were allowed to wear the uniforms, and they were allowed to have these memorial burial societies and these ceremonies. And so from there, that's when it just became this frenzy of, we are not the lost cause. We are not, subjected to any of this, and we have to remember our history. And that's when they began with catechisms. That's when they began to have, like collecting materials and writing books about all this. And then it just becomes like, this is our legacy.
They created a curriculum out of it and got it
Everything.
into a lot of different school districts, right?
Everything. I mean, they had, again, like, how do you build this kind of cult-like following? You got to have symbolism. You have to have, an anthem, like songs, like you have songs, you have armbands or flags, or there's some kind of a symbolism that's attached to it. So like the Confederate flag, like there are so many iterations of the Confederate flag. It isn't just one. Every county had their own version. Every state had their own version. And so there's a whole book that's written about the Confederate flag. We just think of stars and bars, and it's so different. Some had symbols, some had animals, some had whatever. But there was not one unified voice in all this. But again, like, what is memory? And so the statues, I mean, all that comes like in the 1920s, 1930s. So this is now 40, 50 years, post emancipation, post reconstruction. And it's like, this is our history, and we have to remember. We cannot forget, again, like, who names statues over like bad people, villainous people? Like, it was a failed war. Like, they lost. Like, why would you commemorate like you lost? And they're like, but we didn't lose. We fought for states' rights. We didn't lose. So as they say, my South didn't lose a Civil War. And then you got Black folks who are like, I'm a grandson, a son of a Confederate. This is my history. This is my legacy. This is my lineage. I'm wrapped up in this just like white people are. And what is that? Stockholm syndrome? I mean, like, what is that?
Stockholm syndrome, and I mean, a testament to, there's no real way in America other than rhetorically to parse people and legally to parse people out into these little segregated race spaces, ethnicities, and all of that. Because in real time, everybody be blending with everybody in certain ways out of necessity.
But again, like, what do? You work together, you eat together, you sleep together. After you work, everybody's working in the field. So then after work, you go eat. Then after you eat, somebody gets the fiddle, gets the harmonica, you start dancing, everybody's singing, then you go off into the woods or do whatever. I mean, it's like the intimacy. That's why segregation was not a Southern phenomenon.
No.
There was too much intimacy.
It was
from the cradle to the grave, Blacks and whites commingled.
You don't start making Jim Crow segregation laws in the United States until the structure has a problem with the fact that everything they're legislating against is actually happening.
But no, it's until Northerners come south.
I mean,
Northerners come south, and they are appalled. See, the saying is, in the North, you can get high, but don't get close. And the South, you can get close, but don't get high. So when Northerners come south, they are incensed at, I mean, again, think about the level of paternalism that happens in these relationships are intimate. You got Black women nursing white babies.
Hmm.
Can't get any more intimate than
Black
that.
kids and white kids playing with each other until they're
Playing with each other. I mean, white men sleeping with black women. You've got, I mean, the incest that he's sleeping with the daughter that he's bred
yeah.
and the mother.
Wow.
I mean,
Tommy.
all of it, all of it. Not even to mention what's happening with the male slaves. Male slaves get raped,
Absolutely.
you know, and it's white women again, coercing them. It's white men because it's about power,
Yep.
So Northerners come south. I mean, there's like Sarah, oh, what is her name? Sarah Boston, I think is her
Mm.
name. She's 6 years old. Her father is black. They're in Boston. I can't remember the child's name. But anyway, it's a classic Brown versus Board. He's walking his black child past the good white school, and he's like, I want my daughter to go to this school. This is 1848. And
Mm.
he's bringing a suit of why can't my daughter go to the neighborhood school? There's segregated transportation in Boston in
Mm.
the 1840s. So everybody thinks about like, the abolitionists are there and it's this bastion of freedom. And it's like there's segregation in the North.
They,
And it's, I mean, the same, segregation in Philadelphia with the growing free black population. There's segregation in DC. I mean, it's segregated. And so these Northerners come south as carpetbaggers, scallywags, and they're seeing like they're kissing on each other, they're eating together, you know, there wasn't segregation until Northerners came, and then it was separation. So blacks could still go, but there was a partition that you were in the back behind a screen. So you could still go to the restaurant,
mhm.
but you were separated. So it went from separation to exclusion,
Mm.
total exclusion. Because again, this class post emancipation, for those, I mean, we talk about African Americans that had money. When people were hired out as slaves, you kept a percentage in most cases, not all, but in some cases, let's say you got hired out for $5. You maybe got $1 or $2, and your master got three for hiring you.
Mm.
So there was everything about the system was negotiable. There was some, yes, again, slavery is slavery, but you could negotiate within the confines of slavery. So it's almost like, Armando, I'm gonna need you to go over to Peterson's farm because he's short. Again, like you don't need a slave 365.
Yeah.
You only need them to plant and harvest.
Mm.
And so it's like harvest time, I'm gonna hire six people. So you make arrangements with people that own slaves.
Hmm.
You contract with them. And of course, this is my property. I'm borrowing your property. So if something happens, if you get maimed, if you run off, I've got insurance. I owe you because this compensation. Your property is destroyed, your property is lost. And
Mm.
so you are contracting and you're telling the slave owner, you know what? Last time you hired me out, it didn't go so well. I was mistreated. I ain't going. Oh, come on, Armando. Just I do me this solid. I'll give you $3. I'll let you keep three. I'm
Mm.
gonna keep two, you keep three. So these people had money. And when slavery ends, they have money. I mean, there's so many stories about slave catchers breaking up into people's cabins and just taking their stuff. They got mirrors, they got pocket watches with a gold chain. They got stuff.
Mm.
And these poor cracker white people are coming in and they're just ransacking and just, again, who are you to have stuff?
They're
I
looting.
don't have stuff this nice. Where you getting the
Who are
stuff
you
from?
to have? Yeah. Who are you to be doing better than me? It defies the logic of the narrative. Yes.
And so again, like they come into, freedom with serviceable skills, with resources, and the first thing they do is, I was the cook on the plantation. I'm gonna start a catering business.
Hmm.
Food, food and housing are the two
Living
things that
instructor.
people will pay for.
Mm.
Need a place to stay, you need something to eat. Laundry is a third. So this is why the Chinese were setting up laundries,
Yeah.
because they were doing laundry for the miners.
Mm.
And then they got licenses and they were like, I'm going to have a laundry business. And so again, they tried to make laws to say that they're not citizens and they can't have the right to have a business.
Mm.
So, and this is so convoluted, but the first, Chinese to bring suit for cases like that, those are the cases that the NAACP used for all of their civil rights cases. 14th
Oh,
Amendment,
word.
14th Amendment,
That makes so much sense.
14th Amendment, rights of citizenship, 14th Amendment. You cannot discriminate against me. I am a citizen. I have the right to own and operate a license and to have a business to run this laundry. And so it's called the Marigold Report. And that report was basically all the fact finding that the NAACP used to build its legal arms for anti-discrimination suits.
The Marigold Report.
Marigold Report.
Well, that's where we're going to put a pin on it today, Dr. Jones.
And I hope you edit this and condense it down, because I mean, we talked about a lot of different things.
I might cut about 5 minutes out of the final edit because
You
I
might
don't know
want
if
to
know this.
break it up into part 1 and part 2, and you might want to take the end and put it in the beginning, and then
Well, there was a fortunate time in the middle where the power went out on everything behind my computer. I don't know if you can see it. Sound is out, lights is out. You're just talking, and it's good, but I'm back on my side trying to fiddle this out. That's probably going to be edited out.
all right. Well, again, I am available if you want to do talk about something or rehash something. You want to do another session where we can talk about those 4 statutes that make it a lynching. But that didn't come till 1940.
I would love to. And what I want to do with everyone I've had on there here is have you again as a recurring guest. This is
Sure.
almost like your introduction to this audience.
Sure. I mean, I'm really happy to have this conversation, and I'm so happy and just honored to be given this space to just talk about, the work. And it's not my work, it's the work I'm standing on the shoulders of giants and those who have come before me. I'm not an expert. I'm a bit of more of an authority than somebody that wrote and read one book, but you know.
You were being far too modest about yourself. I'm gonna let you cook. I will let you cook.
But again, it's like talking to Dr. Barnes, to Deborah Barnes, like I'm almost embarrassed because, I met her shortly after meeting you.
Yeah.
And I just think about how much I've grown intellectually by her just speaking just randomly. And I'm like, we're just having general conversation. Like, this isn't even like, and I'm being challenged and I'm being like given the space to reassess even my own thought process of what I understand lynching to be. And it's always this question of, what we know and versus what white folks teach us, And so it's like, to know is not the same as to understand. And we think we know, and it's like we just want to know the names and the dates and the places, and that's enough. And it's like, no, we need to understand. We need to understand the forces. We need to understand the structures. We need to understand the systems. All of this is part of a larger issue. And it's kind of like, a friend of mine she's very like, I don't know, she creates her own reality in her mind. And she's like, right now, Trump ain't president. Like, nothing he says has any bearing on me. I do not give him power for that. And I was just like, again, like, we all need to feel that in ourselves. And we all need to, I am not tripping about any of this, because I was like, when did the federal government care about African Americans? When did they care about our history? When did we documented our own history. We always have. We weren't in books. We wrote our own books. We created our own narratives. We didn't let some person tell us how it was. And again, like, we're not monolithic. We don't all have the same experiences. We don't all come from the same place. We don't do enough to talk about the African American presence in the West. We don't do enough to talk about relationships between, Caribbeans and African Americans and other groups that came here. there's unity in all of this. We're now, depending on where you are, we talk about other ethnic groups like Asians and African Americans and the Asian Panthers and all of it. Like, it's not a mystery. Like,
Mhm.
different groups have been in different places looking for work, looking for, a space to exist. It's not an anomaly. The one current theme about history is movement.
Mm.
There's always movement. You don't like it here, go somewhere else. You want an opportunity, go somewhere else. Like, everybody here, all the land is gone. Well, go somewhere else. Find some new land. Reinvent yourself, change your name, straighten your hair, cap your teeth, lie and say you're from the so and so family. Nobody cares. Only in America. Everybody race tricking, shape shifting. Nobody cares. You know, nobody
Be,
cares.
be who you want to be.
Be who you want to be. Honestly, I mean, I think about, Langston Hughes's father was like a cattle rancher in Mexico. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm out. I'm out. So be who you want to be.
Well, I will talk to you very soon,
Well, thank you so
Dr. Jones.
much. It has
Thank
been a
you for
pleasure.
taking so much time
You're so
to
welcome.
spend with me and my audience. I will let you know as soon as the final edit is out. I'm coming out with season 2 during Christmas break, so I'm
Okay.
using my fall to
And how many of these interviews do you plan on doing?
each season is only going to be 6 episodes.
Okay. And this is season 1.
This is season 2.
Oh, season 2.
Yes,
So I was not in the first batch.
no. You're the season 2 is a lot more polished than season 1 was. This hopefully this doesn't get out in the edit, but season 1, y'all. My bad. I mean, y'all made season 1.
That's fine. I'll let you work out the kinks, as I always do. I'm not gonna buy the first prototype. I'll let you work out the kinks.
You don't have to be an early adopter. You know, promise. I appreciate it. Have a good
You're
day.
so welcome. All right, thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
All right,
Yes,
bye-bye.
I know that was a great conversation and you want to hear more. You will in the upcoming weeks. Tune in, like, subscribe, share, comment. Only on ArmandoCollins.com. Peace.